The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, the paper thick and yellowed at the edges, smelling faintly of mildew and lavender. Mara Voss nearly tossed it into the pile of unpaid bills until she saw the return address. Blackwood House, Black Hollow, her grandmother's estate. Mara hadn't spoken to Eleanor Blackwood in over a decade. The woman had been cold, distant, always watching Mara with an unsettling intensity, like she was waiting for something. And now she was dead. The lawyer's letter was curt. As the sole surviving heir, the property is yours. Immediate occupancy is advised. Arrival in Black Hollow. The town of Black Hollow was a graveyard of whispers. Mara's car rattled over the uneven road as she passed the faded welcome sign, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin. The few locals she saw, a gas station attendant, an old woman sweeping her porch, stopped to stare as she drove by. Their gazes lingered just a second too long. They know something. Blackwood House loomed at the end of a winding, overgrown driveway, its gabled roof cutting jagged lines against the bruised twilight sky. The Victorian was a relic of another time, its dark wood siding weathered by decades of neglect. The windows, clouded with grime, reflected the trees like hollow eyes. Mara hesitated at the front steps. The key in her hand felt unnaturally cold. Inside Black Hollow. The air inside was thick with the scent of dust and something else, something sweetly rotten, like old flowers left too long in a vase. Her footsteps echoed as she moved through the foyer, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The furniture was draped in yellowed sheets, frozen in time. A grand staircase curved upward, its banister carved with intricate twisting patterns that made her fingers itch to trace them. Then she saw the door. At the far end of the hallway, barely visible under layers of cracked paint, was a door. Red. Not just any red, the deep, visceral crimson of fresh blood. The first night. Mara told herself she wouldn't explore. Not yet, not in the dark. But the house had other plans. She woke to the sound of scratching. Slow, deliberate, like fingernails dragging over wood. It came from downstairs. Her pulse hammered in her throat as she followed the noise, her bare feet silent on the cold hardwood. The scratching led her to the red door. And there, placed neatly at its base, was a teddy bear. Her teddy bear. Mr. Buttons, the one she'd lost when she was 6. The one she'd buried in the backyard after her mother told her it was too old to keep. Now it sat before the red door, its fur matted and damp as if freshly unearthed. One glassy eye was missing. The other stared at her. Mara reached for it, and the scratching stopped. Silence. Then, from the other side of the door, a child's voice whispered, "You're home." Mara woke with a gasp, her skin slick with sweat. For a moment, she thought it had been a dream. The scratching, the voice, the impossible return of Mr. Buttons. But when she stumbled downstairs, the teddy bear was still there. And now, so were the handprints. Small, child-sized, pressed into the peeling red paint of the door. Fresh. She reached out, her fingers hovering just above the marks. The paint was still tacky, as if applied hours ago, not decades. Then she noticed something worse. The prints weren't random. They formed a pattern. 5 fingers splayed wide, then a 6th. Too many fingers. The town's secrets. Black Hollow's library was a crumbling brick building, its interior smelling of old paper and damp wood. The librarian, Mrs. Driscoll, was a thin woman with sharp eyes that darted to Mara's hands the moment she walked in. "You're Eleanor's girl," she said, not a question. Mara nodded. "I need to know about the house." Mrs. Driscoll's lips pressed into a tight line. She led Mara to a back room where yellowed newspapers filled locked cabinets. 3 disappearances, she said, sliding a folder across the table. A maid in 1927, a little girl in 1963, and your grandmother's caretaker, 3 months ago. Mara flipped through the brittle clippings. Each article ended mid-sentence, as if the printers had been too afraid to finish the stories. The last one showed a grainy photo of Blackwood House. The red door was visible in the background. "Some doors should stay shut," Mrs. Driscoll whispered. The warning. That night, Mara dreamed of the door opening. Inside was a hallway lined with mirrors, each reflecting a different version of herself. One weeping, one laughing, one with hollowed-out eyes. She woke to her phone buzzing. A voicemail from Mrs. Driscoll. The timestamp read "last night," hours after the librarian had locked up and gone home. Mara pressed play. Static, then a wet, rattling breath. "It's not a door," Mrs. Driscoll whispered. "It's a mouth." A choked scream. The line went dead. The revelation. The next morning, the news spread through town like wildfire. Mrs. Driscoll had been found dead, drowned, in her bathtub. The coroner said it was impossible. Her lungs were full of salt water, as if she'd been dragged under the ocean. But Black Hollow was miles from the sea. Mara stood in the library's back room, her hands shaking as she flipped through the last newspaper Mrs. Driscoll had shown her. There, scribbled in the margin in faded ink, was a single word: hungry. The journal smelled of old leather and something bitter, like dried herbs gone to rot. Mara found it tucked beneath a loose floorboard in her grandmother's bedroom, its pages brittle with age. Most entries were mundane: weather reports, grocery lists, the occasional note about a bad night. But the last few pages changed. The handwriting grew jagged, desperate. "It's getting louder. It wants me to open it. I hear the child singing again, the one that isn't there. It's feeding again. God help me." And then, on the final page, "If you're reading this, Mara, run." Beneath the warning, taped to the paper, was a rusted key. The basement. Mara hadn't planned to go back to the red door, but the house had other ideas. That night, she woke to the sound of humming, a child's voice, sweet and off-key, drifting up from the basement. The same lullaby her mother used to sing. Her feet moved before her mind could protest. The floorboards groaned under her weight as she descended, the air thickening with the scent of wet earth and copper. The red door waited. The key fit perfectly. The mirror room. The door opened without a sound. Beyond it stretched a room she couldn't comprehend, walls lined with floor-to-ceiling mirrors, each reflecting a version of herself that wasn't quite right. One Mara wept silently, tears of black ink streaking her cheeks. Another grinned, her teeth too sharp, her eyes glinting like an animal's in the dark. A third simply stared, unblinking, as if waiting for something. Then Mara saw her. At the far end of the room, a mirror showed a future version of herself, bloodied, her clothes torn, her mouth stretched in a scream. The reflection lunged forward, slamming her palms against the glass. "Don't let it in!" The mirror cracked. A spider web of fractures split the surface, and for one heart-stopping second, Mara thought the other her would break through. Then, silence. The reflection was gone. The mirrors were just mirrors again, and the door slammed shut behind her. The missing time. Mara stumbled back into the hallway, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Morning light spilled through the windows. Morning? She'd entered the room at midnight. Where had the hours gone? Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, pulling up her camera roll, a habit she'd started after the first nightmare, proof that she wasn't losing her mind. The last photo was time-stamped 12:07 a.m. Herself standing before the red door, key in hand. The next was 6:32 a.m. A close-up of her own face, her eyes wide with terror, her lips parted in a scream. She didn't remember taking it. The revelation. Back in her grandmother's room, Mara flipped through the journal again, searching for answers. There, wedged between two pages, was a Polaroid. A little girl, no older than 6, standing in front of the red door. Mara recognized the dress, the hair, the face. It was her. But the date on the photo read 1987, 20 years before she was born. Mara woke to the stench of decay. The apple she'd left on the kitchen counter the night before was now a blackened husk crawling with flies. The milk in her coffee had curdled before her eyes, forming thick, yellowish clots. When she reached for the faucet, the water ran rust red for 3 full minutes before clearing. The house is rotting around me. She grabbed her phone to document it, only to find the screen filled with static. Then, slowly, letters formed in the noise. "Don't look back." A breath tickled her ear. She whirled around, but the kitchen was empty. The postmaster's secret. The Black Hollow post office was a cramped, wood-paneled building that smelled of dust and mothballs. The postmaster, Mr. Hargrove, was the oldest man Mara had ever seen, his skin paper-thin, his fingers gnarled like tree roots. He didn't look surprised to see her. "Eleanor's girl," he wheezed. "Knew you'd come asking eventually." Mara slid the Polaroid across the counter, the one of her as a child, decades before her birth. Hargrove didn't flinch. "House always takes a Voss. Your grandmother held it off as long as she could." "Takes what?" His milky eyes fixed on hers. "Your mother didn't tell you, did she?" From under the counter, he produced a yellowed envelope. Inside was a birth certificate. Name, Mara Elise Voss. Mara's hands shook. "This is a mistake." Hargrove pointed to a second document, A handwritten note in her grandmother's spidery script. Sarah made the deal. The house gave her back the child, but it will want payment. The reflection betrays her. Back at Blackwood House, Mara stood before the hallway mirror, gripping the edges of the sink until her knuckles turned white. "None of this is real," she whispered to her reflection. Her reflection blinked. Then it smiled. "You've always known," it murmured, its voice like dry leaves skittering across glass. "Why do you think your mother left?" Mara smashed her fist into the mirror. Glass shattered, blood welled from her knuckles. When she looked again, the shards showed only her own terrified face. Except one. A single fragment, no larger than a coin, reflected a little girl standing behind her. The girl from the Polaroid. The hidden room. That night, Mara tore through her grandmother's study, searching for answers. Behind a loose panel in the wall, she found a hidden compartment. Inside was a small box containing a lock of baby-fine hair, labeled Mara before, a dried rose, its petals the same crimson as the door, a newspaper clipping about a missing child in 1987. The girl in the photo looked exactly like her. Beneath it all was a single sentence scrawled in her grandmother's hand. "It doesn't just take, it replaces." The whisper in the walls. Mara fell asleep at the study desk, her head pillowed on the documents. She dreamed of the red door opening. A child's hand reached out, and then she was jolted awake by the sound of scratching inside the walls. Not rats, fingernails. And a voice so faint she almost missed it. "You're not supposed to be here." Mara woke to the sound of chewing. Slow, wet, deliberate. Her brother Eli stood at the foot of her bed, his back to her, shoulders hunched. Moonlight bled through the curtains, painting his silhouette in silver and shadow. "Eli?" No response. Just the steady, rhythmic sound of teeth grinding against something solid. Mara reached for her phone, thumbing the recording button as she crept closer. "Eli, what are you?" He turned. His lips were smeared red. Something glistened between his teeth. Mara grabbed his jaw, forcing his mouth open. A human molar, still bloody at the root, rolled onto his tongue. Eli's eyes snapped open, and Mara saw nothing but blackness where his pupils should be. The recording. The next morning, Eli remembered nothing. "You're losing it, Mara," he muttered, scrubbing at his mouth as if he could still taste copper. "I don't sleepwalk." Mara played the recording. At first, it was just Eli's muffled chewing. Then, a giggle. High-pitched, childish. Not Eli's voice. The audio warped, twisting into a nursery rhyme sung by a chorus of children. "Blackwood House, Blackwood House, open up and let us out. First you chew, then you swallow. Soon there'll be nothing left to follow." Eli's face drained of color. "That's not me." Mara rewound the tape. This time, the recording was just static. The basement visit. Eli didn't believe her. Not about the Polaroid, not about the birth certificate, not about the red door. So he went to see for himself. Mara found him standing in front of the door, his palm pressed flat against the peeling paint. "Eli, don't." He turned the knob. It opened easily. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Eli's body jerked, his spine arching unnaturally, as if something had yanked him by an invisible hook. His mouth opened, and a child's voice, sweet and sing-song, spilled out. "It's almost full." The change. After that, Eli wasn't Eli anymore. He smiled too wide. He stopped blinking, and he kept repeating the same phrase like a broken record. "You should feed it." When Mara refused, he brought offerings of his own. A dead crow, its wings splayed like a macabre fan. A lock of hair. His? Hers? A photograph of their mother, the eyes carefully scratched out. He left them at the red door like gifts at an altar. The truth in the night. That night, Mara woke to Eli standing over her, his breath sour with decay. "It showed me things," he whispered. "You were supposed to be the first, but Grandma hid you. Now it's angry." He reached for her, and Mara saw it. Just for a second. The thing wearing her brother's skin wasn't Eli at all. Its pupils were vertical, like a cat's, like the house's. The locked door. Mara barricaded Eli in the guest room, her hands shaking as she turned the key. From inside, he laughed. "You can't lock me away," he crooned. "I'm already in the walls." And then, faint but unmistakable, Mara heard it. The sound of tiny hands scratching from inside the plaster. Mara woke to the sound of Eli laughing. It came from inside the walls, a wet, gurgling chuckle that slithered through the house like a living thing. She pressed her ear to the plaster, her pulse hammering, and heard it again. "Mara, it's hungry." Then silence. She pulled away, and the wallpaper split open beneath her fingers, peeling back in jagged strips to reveal something pale and glistening beneath. Teeth, embedded in the plaster like pearls in concrete. The wall gives up its dead. Mara took a hammer to the basement wall. The first strike sent a crack spider webbing through the plaster. The second split it open like a wound. The smell hit her first, copper and rot and something sweetly fungal. Then she saw them. Bones. Dozens, maybe hundreds, tangled together in a grotesque nest. Some were yellowed with age, others still streaked with ragged bits of flesh. And at the center, a small, mummified hand. It clutched a tarnished locket. Mara pried it open with shaking fingers. Inside was a photograph of her mother as a child, no older than 8, standing in front of the red door. But it wasn't just a picture. It was a warning. Scrawled in childish handwriting along the border, "Don't let it take you too." The ritual. In the wreckage of the wall, Mara found a newspaper clipping from 1927. The headline, "Local girl vanishes in Blackwood house. Family claims door took her." Beneath it, hidden in the margins of the article, was a list of names and dates. A ledger. A receipt. Every few years, a name. Every name, a disappearance. At the bottom, in fresh ink, Eleanor Blackwood, delayed payment. Sarah Voss, debt unpaid. Mara Voss, coming due. And beneath that, instructions. To sate the hunger, a Voss must step through, willingly, or it takes them all. Eli's gift. Mara didn't hear him approach. One moment she was alone in the basement, the next, Eli stood behind her, his breath cold against her neck. "It's time," he whispered. In his hands was a knife, not a kitchen knife, an antique thing, its blade etched with the same twisting patterns as the banister upstairs. He pressed it into her palm, his fingers lingering too long, his skin waxy and dead. "Cut the thread," he murmured, "or become the feast." Then he was gone, leaving Mara alone with the bones, the locket, and the terrible understanding settling in her gut. Her grandmother had tried to cheat the house. Her mother had run from it. But Mara was the payment. The door opens. She didn't remember climbing the stairs. She didn't remember walking to the red door. But suddenly, she was there, and the door was open. Inside, the mirror room waited, but now the reflections weren't just twisted versions of herself. They were the missing. The maid from 1927, her mouth sewn shut with red thread. The girl from 1963, her eyes hollow pits. And her grandmother, young and terrified, pounding on the glass. "Run," the reflections mouth, "while you still can." Behind her, Eli laughed. Too late. The walls were breathing. Mara pressed her palm against the hallway plaster and felt it, a slow, rhythmic expansion, like the ribs of some great beast. The air smelled of wet earth and burnt hair, thick enough to choke on. From behind the red door came a new sound, a heartbeat. Not hers, not Eli's, something much, much older. Eli's last words. Eli stood before the open door, his body rigid, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. The thing wearing her brother's skin had shed all pretense of humanity. His pupils were black slits now, his smile stretching too wide, too many teeth. "It's time, Mara," he whispered. "You were always its favorite." Then the shadows behind the door surged forward and took him. Tendrils of darkness wrapped around Eli's limbs, yanking him into the void beyond. His scream cut off mid-breath, severed as cleanly as a candle snuffed out. The door slammed shut. Silence. Then a wet thud. The door creaked open just enough to spit something onto the floor. Eli's severed index finger, the nail still painted black from when he joked about it weeks ago. It twitched, curled, pointed at Mara. The librarian's final confession. Mara fled to the only place left, the Black Hollow Library. Mrs. Driscoll's replacement was a hollow-eyed woman who didn't speak, just gestured to the back room where the old records were kept. There, tucked inside a ledger, Mara found a letter. The librarian's last words. "The house doesn't just take lives, it consumes identities. The people who vanish, they don't die, they become part of it. Echoes trapped in the walls, reflections in the glass. And when it's hungry, It wears their faces to lure the next meal. Your grandmother knew. She locked the door to protect you. But it's too late now. It's already tasted you. The reflections offer. Mara returned to the house, the letter crumpled in her fist. She didn't want to look in the mirror. She couldn't stop herself. Her reflection stared back, but this time it didn't mimic her. It smiled. "You have a choice," it whispered. "Take my place, or the house takes everyone you love." Behind her reflection, shapes moved in the glass. Her mother, Eli, grandmother Eleanor, all watching, all waiting. The door opens again. Mara stood before the red door. This time, it opened on its own. Inside stood her, but not her. This Mara was older, her eyes hollow, her mouth sewn shut with the same red thread as the maid from 1927. She reached out a skeletal hand. "Welcome home," she mouthed. Behind her, the mirrors began to crack. The other Mara's fingers were cold as death. She gripped Mara's wrist with skeletal strength, her sewn-shut mouth twitching as if straining to speak. Around them, the mirror room trembled, glass shattering in slow motion, each fragment reflecting a different horror. Eli being dragged into darkness, her grandmother screaming behind glass, the child from the Polaroid pressing tiny hands against the other side. "Take my place," the doppelganger mouthed, "or it takes them all." Mara looked down at the thing's wrists, pale, scarred, familiar. They bore the same crescent-shaped birthmark she had. This wasn't just some phantom. This was what she would become. The fire. She ran, not away, deeper, into the heart of the house, where the walls pulsed like a living thing, where the floorboards split open to reveal teeth beneath. She poured gasoline in a frenzied trail, the smell sharp and chemical, her hands shaking so badly she could barely strike the match. The first flame caught the curtains, blooming orange and hungry. The house screamed. Not metaphorically, literally. A shriek like nails on glass tore through the air as the fire spread, the walls peeling back to reveal muscle and tendon beneath the plaster. The staircase writhed, banisters snapping like bones. And through it all, the red door stood untouched, unharmed, watching. The unscathed truth. Mara stumbled through the collapsing hallway, embers licking at her clothes, the heat blistering her skin. At the threshold, she turned back and saw it. Amid the ashes, perfectly preserved, a single page from her grandmother's journal. The paper should have been cinders. It wasn't even warm. In Eleanor's spidery handwriting. "It never burns, it only waits." Behind her, the red door creaked open. The escape. She didn't remember running through the woods. She didn't remember the drive back to the city. She only woke days later in her apartment, her skin raw with burns that shouldn't have healed so fast, her throat raw from screaming. But she was alive. The house was gone, wasn't it? Epilogue. The editor's visit. 6 months later, Mara's book about Blackwood House became a bestseller. Her editor, Daniel, came to celebrate, toasting with champagne that tasted like ashes in Mara's mouth. "You've outdone yourself," he said, flipping to the last page. That ending chilling. Mara froze. She hadn't written an ending. She grabbed the manuscript. There, in print she didn't remember approving, was a final line. "Come home." Daniel frowned. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Mara forced a smile, just tired. Daniel turned back to refill his glass, and Mara saw it. The back of his neck, a scar, small, precise, where Eli's birthmark had been. Daniel turned back, grinning. "Miss me?" His voice was Eli's. Behind him, reflected in the window, the hallway stretched longer than it should have. And at the end, a red door.